Zan, Zindagi, Azadi. Three beautiful words you may never have heard before, ringing out in the streets across Iran. These three words form a protest chant. Their meaning tells you everything you need to know about the protests in which people are demonstrating and dying in Iran. Zan means women, because it is the women and the girls of Iran who are not just the spark of the current protests, but the heart of them. It started with this woman, Mahsa Amini. The 22-year-old Kurdish woman was arrested by Iran's morality police, allegedly for violating the country's strictly enforced Islamic dress code. She died in police custody. According to the hospital, she died 3 days after being arrested. Now, Iranian officials claim she suffered a heart attack due to an underlying medical condition, but her family says she didn't have an underlying medical condition. They say witnesses told them she was beaten by police. Iran denies those allegations. Iranian officials say an investigation is underway. While some women in Iran, and indeed across the world, make the choice to wear a hijab or a head covering, in Iran it's become the symbol of the power of the patriarchy, the Iranian theocratic regime over women. So-called morality police walk around scolding people, mostly women, for dressing immodestly or wearing their headscarves too loosely, something that is very common in that country. But now the hijab and Iran's highly controversial and sometimes brutal enforcement of how and where it is worn has become the driving force of an open revolt led by courageous young women. Zan, women. Look at these images. Women stripping off their hijabs, waving them in open defiance of authority. The catalyst for this movement was Mahsa Amini's death, and the protests resulting from it have been not about head coverings, but about life itself, zindagi. The second word in the chant, haunting the souls of Iran's fundamentalist rulers, zindagi means life. In these protests about women and their rights and life itself, more than 200 people, including 23 children, are believed to have lost their lives. That's according to Iran Human Rights Group. They are risking their lives for the rights of women and for something else not commonly associated with Iran, liberty. That is the final word in the chant, azadi. It translates into liberty or freedom. Mahsa Amini's death is now about much more than a headscarf and a dress code that she allegedly broke. It's about more than modesty and religious rules. The protests in Iran are now about Zan, Zindagi, Azadi, women, life, and liberty. Most of us take for granted the ability to make certain basic choices like what we wear without the government interfering, but not in Iran, where women and girls are literally enshrined in law as second-class citizens, mandated to wear hijabs, to wear so-called modest clothing, and to hide their hair in public, forced to be invisible. It's not clear that these growing protests will move the needle. Iranian forces continue their crackdown, and increasingly they'll do so away from the cameras and the cell phones and the journalists. And more people will lose their lives. But something about this movement does feel different to me. A younger generation of Iranians seems to be saying enough is enough. For years, young people in Iran have watched as their older siblings and their parents choked in silence under the increasingly insular Islamic Republic. They have lived a life fighting for azadi, for freedom. They are facing increasing economic hardship and civil oppression, but led in large part by the girls and women in their ranks, they seem determined to redraw the path of their own futures. Look at this. NBC News has reviewed social media videos showing girls in schoolyards, this particular schoolyard, standing up to traditional symbols of authority. You see students waving their headscarves and punching their fists in the air while heckling a man at a podium in front of them. This kind of dissent was almost unheard of prior to this movement. These girls know the risks they are taking. They know that not abiding by the government's dress code could mean punishment and even death, but they also know what's at stake when a woman's rights are taken away. We've seen this play out time and time again in Iran. For decades, everyday Iranians have given up their lives, zindagi, fighting against the regime and its oppressive principles. And every time the Islamic Republic of Iran proves too powerful to counter. Maybe this time will be different. So to the women of Iran, I say, you are not voiceless. You are not invisible. We hear you. We see you. Zan, Zindagi, Azadi. For the women, for life, and for liberty.